Welcome to The Explainer. Have you ever wondered about the math behind a perfect basketball shot? Or how a satellite dish is designed? Well, today, we're cracking the code on quadratic equations, the amazing tool that describes all these curves and so much more.
Okay, so let's start with something we all know, straight lines. They're predictable, they have simple equations. But let's be real, the world is full of curves, isn't it? The path of a ball flying through the air, the swooping cables of a bridge. So how do we possibly describe that with math?
Well, to do that, you need a totally different kind of equation. One with a little more oomph. And that brings us to the star of today's explainer, the mighty quadratic equation.
So here it is, in its standard form. Now, the most important part, the absolute magic ingredient, is that x squared term. That's the secret sauce. Without it, you just have a boring old straight line. But with it, you get a dynamic, beautiful curve. That's what makes the whole thing work. Now, if you've seen things with an x squared in them before, like in polynomials, you're going to feel right at home. The core idea is exactly the same. We just use a different word. Instead of zeros, we call them roots. But what are they? They're simply the solutions, the values of x that solve the puzzle. And here's the cool part. An equation can have up to two of them.
And this is what they look like in the wild. Every single quadratic equation graphs out into this perfect symmetrical U-shape called a parabola. And get this, you can tell which way it's going to open just by looking at that first number, a. If a is positive, the parabola opens upwards, kind of like a smile. If a is negative, it opens downwards, like a frown. It's that simple.
All right, so we know what they are and what they look like. But the big question is, how do we actually find those roots? How do we solve the thing? Well, let's pull out the first tool in our new toolkit.
First up, we've got factoring. I like to think of this as the elegant method. It's like being a lockpick. When you know the combination, it just clicks. It's fast, it's clean, and honestly, it's really satisfying when it works out.
Let's walk through this one together. Our mission, find two numbers that multiply to get -10 and add up to -3. How about -5 and +2? Perfect. So we use those to split that middle term. Then we group them up, factor out what's common, and voila! We get x minus 5 times x plus 2 equals 0. And for that to be true, either x is 5 or x is -2. Those are our roots.
Now, factoring is great, but let's be honest. Sometimes you stare at an equation and you just can't spot the factors. So what do you do then? You bring out the big guns, the master key that unlocks any quadratic equation.
You know, the source material calls this next method a Ramban, which is a fantastic word that basically means a cure-all, a universal remedy. And it's called that for one simple reason. It works every single time. No exceptions.
But before we even use the master key, we have to consult our crystal ball. It's called the discriminant. This little calculation, d equals b squared minus 4ac, is amazing because it predicts exactly what kind of answers you're going to find before you do all the hard work.
So what does this crystal ball tell us? Well, if d is positive, you know you're looking for two different solutions. If d is exactly 0, you'll get just one repeated solution. And if d is negative, that's your signal to stop. It means there are no real roots to find. It's a huge time saver.
And here it is, the master key itself, the quadratic formula. As long as that discriminant d isn't negative, you just plug in your a, b, and d right into this formula. That little plus or minus symbol in there, that's what gives you your two different roots. It's a guaranteed path to the answer.
Okay, so we've got two really powerful tools. We have the quick lock pick, factoring, and the unstoppable master key, the formula. So how on earth do you decide which one to use?
Here's a brilliant, practical strategy, the 10-second rule. When you first see a problem, give yourself just 5 to 10 seconds to see if you can spot the factors in your head. If they don't immediately jump out at you, don't get bogged down. Just switch gears and go straight for the quadratic formula. It's all about being efficient.
So, let's recap our quadratic toolkit. We now know a quadratic equation is defined by its x squared term, and it graphs as that cool U-shaped parabola. You've got two tools to solve it: the lockpick, factoring, and the master key, the quadratic formula. And you've got a killer strategy to choose between them: the 10-second rule.
You know, this is so much more than just a math lesson. This is a key that unlocks a deeper way of seeing the world. From physics to engineering, these equations are hiding everywhere in plain sight. So now that you have the tools, what are you ready to solve?